The school of the Manticore has always been shrouded in mystery since their first introduction in the Blood and Wine DLC for The Witcher 3. But you might not know that a few days ago we were actually given information about the origins of the school and how they operate. Since June of 2020, we've been given more and more information about the origins of the Witcher schools, according to the CDPR lore. It started with the release of a Witcher's journal, which told the story of Erland of Larvik, the founder of the School of the Griffin. We also got some information on how the first Witchers operated, and the origins of the school of the cat, viper, bear and the wolf. This information was later expanded on in the Al-Zur Gwent journey, where we got the cards for the founders of the Witcher schools, as well as some extra insights into their origins. So far we have not yet gotten anything for the wolf school, but a few days ago we got the origins of the Manticore school. To talk about the Manticore school, we first have to talk about the school of the bear. The bear school was the first Witcher school created after a conflict between its leader Arnagat and the Witcher order. But the way the bear school operated was not appreciated by every one of its members, particularly a Witcher named Ivar Evil Eye. He betrayed Arnagat, almost killing him, before heading off to start the School of the Viper. Amongst the Witchers who followed Ivar was one called Iwan. He didn't care for the brutal philosophy of Arnagat, had no problems in following Ivar. However, it was not long after the Witchers left the bear school that Iwan started to have doubts about Ivar. His visions of the Wild Hunt and the Grand Master Witcher's goal of defeating them were not something that Iwan wanted to be a part of. And so he and a few other Witchers who had their doubts about Ivar went to the Tearshare Mountains, where there was a rumored fort which could provide them with shelter. The group of Witchers would soon start to find their source of revenue in a less traditional way than most Witchers. They would not hunt for monsters and instead be guards for merchant caravans, traveling through the Koroth Desert towards Zerrikania. It is not uncommon for Witchers to be guards against monsters, but it's rare for them to only act as guards. Guarding the merchants turned out to be a very lucrative business for the Witchers, and they quickly adapted to the new roles. But soon they would encounter a new, even better opportunity. One day, while traveling through the Koroth Desert, Iwan and his fellow Witchers came across a caravan, which was under attack by a pair of Manticores. The Witchers recognized the markings of Zerrikanian royalty, and quickly jumped into action when they found a few survivors trying to fend off the Manticores. The Witchers did what they do best, and slew the beasts, saving the survivors, amongst which was the Zerrikanian queen's court mage, Nasira Faison. The sorceress was on her way to the northern realms, to Aretuza, when she and her caravan were attacked. She was very grateful to the Witchers, and promised them their weight in gold, as well as an audience with the queen, in exchange for a safe return home. The Witchers took her back to Zerrikania's capital, where they were received rather well. They were introduced to the queen as Alcatil, meaning slayer in Zerrikanian. When the queen heard of their deeds and capabilities, she offered them a deal, one which the Witchers could hardly refuse. The Witcher school of the Manticore would work exclusively for the Zerrikanian crown. They would act as guards to their merchant caravans and emissaries. In return, they would be given 2 newly built castles, one on each side of the Koroth Desert, which would allow them to fully start their Witcher school. The Witchers agreed to the deal, and allied themselves with the Zerrikanian crown. 2 castles would soon be built for them, Beheld Nar, located in the west, and Bialsuf al-Saraya in the east. The names of the keeps have their own meanings Zerrikanian, and together they form a saying. Beheld Nar means in a suit of fire, and Bialsuf al-Saraya means with swift swords, meaning fully in a suit of fire with swift swords. Bialsuf al-Saraya served as a keep where the Witchers would train new Witchers. It was located closest to Zerrikania, and it was where the school's founder, Iwan, spent most of his time. To adapt to the Zerrikanian culture, he would change his name to Imad Assem, and he became the queen's personal Witcher. The Grand Master Manticore Witcher would spend most of the time balancing between protecting and aiding the queen, as well as overseeing the training of the new Witchers. There was a slight problem at first, when it came to the mutations of the young Witchers to be. Iwan, or Imad, didn't fully remember the precise details of the mutation process. He did know parts of it, but he tried to act like he was just hiding information while he actually didn't know. And so, with the help of the sorceress he had saved, they were first engineered the Witcher's mutations, resulting in some slight adjustments and changes. The crowned sorceress would, together with the fellow mages, attempt to recreate the Witcher mutations to be used on the famed Zerrikanian warrior women. However, their results were not what they had hoped for, as they had no success in their attempts. The Witchers would serve the crown of Zerrikania for a good while, and they changed their way of fighting to be more defensive, carrying around round shields made of meteorite steel, forged in Beheldnar, the western fortress. New Witchers would be trained in using the sword and shield to defend others, protecting them from the desert's many threats, like for example gigascorpions and manticores. In their bandoliers, they would be able to carry a decent amount of potions, which of course would be very important, seeing how many beasts that dwell the desert have venomous and toxic attacks. The school of the Manticore thrived in Zerrikanian rule, until everything came crashing down. In 1146, the Queen of Zerrikania wanted to marry her son to the Princess of Metina, and so a large royal caravan was set up to traverse the Gorth Desert. The prince, his entire entourage, and many of his family members went with him, and of course for protection, the Manticore Witchers came along. Nearly the entire school helped in escorting the caravan, even Imad Assem, although the Witcher was becoming older and no longer in his prime. The journey through the sands went pretty well. It was however when they arrived at the Fairy Mountains that things went wrong. One early morning, a bright light rose from the west. A fire elemental had appeared. It wasn't just any fire elemental. This one was enormous, standing at the height of 20 meters, or about 65 feet, or 11 geralds. The Witchers rushed towards the monstrosity to defend the caravan, but the elemental proved too powerful. In most conditions, the Witchers would have used siege equipment to take down some of the very large beasts they encountered, but they didn't have any with them on that specific journey, probably because arriving in another kingdom with siege equipment seems like a bad move. Almost all of the Witchers present at the battle died, along with half the Zerrikanian royal family and a third of the court. The day would go down in their history as the Day of Fire, and as a result of what happened that day, Witchers were no longer supported by the crown of Zerrikania. It was still a mystery who or what caused the attack of the Titanic elemental, especially considering that one elemental, the size of the one that attacked, was almost impossible to occur without a mage playing some part of it. This led to speculation that perhaps enemies of the Zerrikanian crown, or enemies of the School of the Manticore, played a part in the attack. The eventual fate of the Manticore Grandmaster is unknown. We are never told outright that he had died, which in these kinds of texts most of the time means that he could have survived the events of that day. A number of Manticore Witchers remained, but they would no longer be able to find work in Zerrikania, resulting in most of them heading a bit more west to the Teetershire Mountains, where they would stay in their western fort, seeing how their eastern fort was too close to Zerrikania itself now. Presumably, no new Witchers were trained anymore. They had no mage that could help them, and they lacked most of their resources and finances. Those that survived, whether it was because they got away in the fight, or because they were not there when that day came, became aimless and started wandering the Gorth Desert. This might have tied in to Merton, the Witcher from the School of the Manticore, from the Blood and Wine DLC. He was an alcoholic, which could have been the result of what happened to his school. He could have felt guilty by not being able to save those present on that day, and he might have actually turned to religion to seek some kind of forgiveness for not being able to save those that were present. Around the time of Witcher 3, there were only a handful of Manticore Witchers still out there. The School of the Manticore was the first one to fall, meaning that all the Manticore Witchers that are still alive are older than Geralt of Rivia. The ones that remained still spent their winters in Beheldnar. The fortress has long since started to break down, but at least the Witchers still have tales of the good old days to reminiscent about. Zerrikania, on the other hand, has since sought different ways to trade and travel with the West Coast. Instead of land caravans, they went in search for a sea route, to prevent them from ever experiencing another day of fire. What do you think of the origins of the Manticore school? Till next video. Bye.